I think everybody's here. I'm just going to mute, ask to mute, no, not unmute, don't unmute. So mute, we should all be muted. So firstly, thank you, Howard, for joining us today on this talk, and how lucky, I guess, how lucky we are. There's still more people trying to enter the room. Let me just back to him. I don't know why this person's popping up. Okay. I'll pin you, Howard, because everybody's name keeps. So, firstly, thank you, Howard, for coming today. And
well, thank you.
Lucky us, and I was just speaking to Rupert about how we've been trying to get hold of you, which is, it's taken a while, and I guess over our time of building a community and trying to find our voice, it's been nice that we've kind of come back to you, and your presence is becoming bigger and more interesting, and your connection to fashion and drawing is quite important to the direction of where we're going.
Right.
So we make drawing at the center point of all of the projects that we work on. So my background, just to give you a quick understanding, I did illustration and drawing at Kingston, and then I went into the Royal College to do visual communication, and while I was there, it was mainly about drawing. So my background, drawing, and I've gone on to work for Dior and Tom Ford and various brands as a fashion artist, fashion illustrator. So drawing is centered to my practice, and that's why getting to you and getting you in the conversation was so important, because we're in this sort of counterbalance between fashion illustrator, fashion artist, and artist. So, and I guess a drawer rather than draftsperson. So these are the sort of debates that we sort of are playing with. And I know with your practice, which is so interesting, and drawing being the center point of what you do. So I guess I'm going to put up a little presentation, which I just showed you a minute ago, just to give people sort of a space for us to start a conversation. Right. And then we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
And I know now you're becoming a Zoom expert. my Zoom skills are all over the place at the moment, I'm finding. So let me just get back to this. I'm just going to share my screen. But if you don't use Zoom a lot, you find that you become not great on Zoom. Okay, so let's get this. So can you all see this fine? Can you see this, Howard?
Yes, I can.
So firstly, is it Howard Tangye?
Well, I say with a G, so it's, I say Tangye.
So that was, I guess that was the first question, Tangye. And let's just move on a page. So peeling back the layers, I guess what I would like to find out is, you know, we know about your tutoring, and we know about who you've tutored, but a bit like Lucian Freud, I find that the artist space is quite an important space to find as your place of tranquility, to be able to create drawings either in a mess or in cleanliness. So I'd be quite interested to know your journey of building up your space to become your place of sort of comfort. Like, describe your environment and your house and where your studio is.
Well, I have a studio in my house where I live, because I like to be able to come down in the morning and see the work first thing. And it's a space that's just been established over many years, you know. I chose it as a place to live, but it wasn't necessarily meant to be a place to work, but it just happened to be suitable, and I have the space in the house to do it. So I have a dedicated room just for the studio. And it's on a practical level, it's got 3 large windows at the front. So it has a very good light and ventilation. And the importance for me is that I work pretty 95% during the day. I don't work at night. So I use just natural daylight. I don't like to work with artificial light. So it has to, and if it's a sort of a very dark, cloudy day, then it's quite a struggle. But that's how it really is the most important thing, is the light.
And what about time? Are you up early then? So in the winter, are you up early or?
Well, I usually get up I usually wake up about 6, particularly in the summer. In the winter, it is a bit later, but you know, I have the privilege now to be able to get up when I feel like it. But I still get up early because I like to get, you know, the morning is quite good to just get into the rhythm of the day, if you like, whether you're working or not. So, but I find the very early morning is really just for me. I don't usually have any sitters come until at least 11 o'clock, because it sort of takes me time to sort of prepare for my day's work. And I use that as part of the ritual of doing the work. You know, it gets me in the right frame of mind.
And so when you get up, because you know, when you're at college, you might do some fast sketches or preliminary drawings, or do you just get up, have a cup of tea, read something? Like what would be the routine before starting?
Oh, right. Well, I just usually get up and, you know, the usual, and then I have breakfast. I actually quite like breakfast as a meal. I think it's quite enjoyable, and you know, it gives you the energy to kick you off for the day. So I usually have breakfast, and by the time I've done all that, then I'll probably, with a cup of tea, I'll come to the studio and start preparing, which can take a little while because I usually have to clean the brushes from the previous day and make sure the pastels are all right. And I like them laid out like a kind of, I like the work, like my equipment and materials laid out a bit like an operating table, you know, so I know exactly where everything is because I can reach for it without even thinking about it and see it quite clearly. So that's the main thing I do in the morning, is just really getting myself ready and then getting the space ready.
And
but it's quite calming, but it's also because when I'm working with a sitter, I'm usually always quite stressed. It doesn't matter if they've been sitting for me for 20 years or 1 week. I get a bit nervous. I think it's the anticipation and the responsibility of trying to produce something that's going to work. You know?
And I guess that was sort of my next question, but more about like if it's going wrong, like you know, sometimes you're drawing and it's just getting worse, or because obviously you've got a sitter. How do you deal with that?
Well, it never gets to that. It never gets to usually if it's not going right, I mean, you have to work through that, and you can pull it out, you know, you can still pull it out, it can still work. But I mean, the final judgment is really after you've finished, then you can really see it a bit more objectively. But I don't think I can really see it until the next day. Because sometimes things I wasn't quite happy with the next day, I think it's okay, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't really have, I mean, I do have, it's still quite difficult and demanding, but if I know if something's not quite going right, I usually swear or do something to express my frustration. And that sort of releases all that. And then I just carry on until it's right, you know. But I don't think it's, I never find it totally a waste of time. You know, I usually always just keep going with it, because you can make many lines, but the eye is quite discerning, and it can always tell you which is the right one, even after the drawing's finished. So if you've got one line, which was really meant to just be, you might have lots of lines when you really only want one, but one of them will be the right one, and you know, your eye will tell you which one it is. So that to me is still working, you know.
And I guess, because I read some information about your space and how you sort of peeled back the wallpapers and varnished the walls. And I remember Lucian Freud having these sort of plastered walls and working directly on plaster. Is there a certain sort of look and feel that you liked to the rawness of the environment being stripped back?
Well, I don't know if, I suppose it does have a psychological effect. I don't like anything to be too clinical, if that's what you like, if that's what you mean. I mean, I do like to think that I've created the whole space. So, but sometimes it's best to just not do too much to it, you know. You know, it's a bit like the drawing, you know, sometimes, or even the sitters, you know, people worry that it's not completely perfect. Well, to me, sometimes the imperfections are rather beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
So it's usually also that kind of thing. So it could relate to, I suppose you could also relate that to the decoration of the room. You know, there's a character to it. I suppose that's what I find.
Yeah.
You put your mark on it. That's what it is.
Yeah, because I saw a documentary on Paula Rego as well, and she spent a lot of her time building this space, and it sort of grew like a fungus. If you know, the Paula Rego studios, and I think it was quite amazing to watch her work. And I think, you know, seeing your environment has it's slowly being built like an art space.
Yes. Well, I'm flattered that you've referred to Paula Rego and Lucian Freud. I admire both of them, but if that's the case, I wasn't aware that that's how they felt about their space or what they did. But I have discovered over the years that some things I do find after a while have, you know, I have similar, I suppose, tastes or peculiarities, I guess, that you like to create your own space and how it happens. Sometimes it happens by not doing anything, you know, just leave it alone.
Yeah, and I guess your space is, and also about cleaning up. Do you find you clean up at the end of the day or at the beginning, or you just leave it? You know, you're sort of exhausted. I remember doing life drawing, and at the end of life drawing, I'd go back if you're at university, back to halls or something, and pass out because it was so it was exhausting. Like
It
a
is
life
exhausting.
model, it would be so exhausting. And if you did
Yes,
10 hours of life drawing, and if it was measured drawing or whatever it was a battle.
yes, it
That's,
is
that's
exhausting.
how I felt.
But no, I usually clean. I usually don't do anything at the end of the day. I usually do it always in the first thing in the morning, the day after.
So next, I guess now we've kind of got a sort of grasp of the studio environment. An important part is the sitter and selecting your sort of people that you pick
Yes,
from, I guess, friends or previous students or colleagues or local people, whether it's I think someone was saying about a plumber. How do you pick on look, style? What makes you select a sitter?
well, usually it's not straight. It's very rarely straight off. But the drawing on the bottom there and on the screen of the girl in the check shirt, that's a girl called Natasya. She's a Russian girl. And when I first met her through a friend, we were just having coffee, and that was the first time I met her. And I knew straight away I had this impulse that I wanted to draw her. But I don't usually ask people straight away. I mean, I do have the impulse or the thought to ask them. I think that I consider them to be interesting to draw, would be interesting to draw. So I suppose at first I'm mentally drawing them. But with Natasya, Anastasia, that's her name, Anastasia. When I first met her, I thought she looked very interesting, and I asked her almost immediately. But that happens quite rarely. Usually if I see somebody and I quite like them, it takes a few more meetings, or I see them just by chance in my company or somewhere around. And that's when I ask them. But I'm usually quite shy about asking people because I'm never sure whether they're going to want to do it, But I'm usually quite right. When I've chosen somebody, it's usually it works out. But it's nothing to do with just their looks. It's the way they move, how they sit, how they stand or they walk, or just their presence, really. And there's something about them that I suppose inspires me.
I guess it's the similar approach to a photographer picking a person to photograph. It's almost like a magnet that draws you to that moment. And I think I don't think there's enough people now that are doing this sort of sitter artist relationship. I think it's a sort of maybe a dying craft or a dying breed.
I'm sure it is.
Which I think is either a shame or it will become a sort of a luxury experience of the artist and the sitter, quite a romantic pastime. But I guess that's because I know, like I mentioned Paula Rego, because I was watching her documentary recently, and she was speaking about I think her translator became her sitter, and she had this particular woman who kind of looked like her, and I think that was, she always saw herself in these characters or people that she used as a sitter. Where I think Lucian Freud was more of relationship based.
Right.
And have you done many self-portraits?
I have done quite a few actually. But I started to do them very early on because I didn't have a sitter. And when I was at college, I'm pretty sure like one of my tutors may have said, well, just draw yourself, you know. The beauty of just drawing yourself is that you can sit there, you don't have to worry about keeping them waiting, or, you know, it's taking a long time, or, it's just you that you're drawing. So you can sort of, there is that aspect. But you do, by having somebody live, you know, in front of you is, for me, the most important. I can't draw from photographs. I mean, I could, but I don't like it, you know.
Yeah, I guess it's as I said, a luxury to be able to pick a sitter, get the time with them, and have that sort of connective experience. Have you ever sat with a sitter and it potentially ends or doesn't work out? I'm just thinking to certain artists who fell out with their sitter.
No, well, no, I've never fallen out with anybody, but sometimes, you know, if it was somebody, I think I've had very few where it didn't sort of really work. But the thing was, usually because someone asked me to draw them. So it was like a commission. It wasn't particularly my choice. But the thing is, with having a sitter, it is actually a relationship, because the sitter is, they're collaborating with you on this job. And without that collaboration and without them sort of engaged with the drawing, that's when it doesn't work. So that's really the most important thing. So it doesn't really matter if it's a commission or whether it's just somebody I chose myself. If the sitter is engaging with you, then it should work. That's absolutely true. And it can disturb the artist, or it can disturb me, if you like, if they're not, you know, it just feels like there's a wall between you. So in that way, I think it will affect the drawing in some way, without question.
And has any sitter, because I know vanity comes into the equation with some sitters, and I'm just wondering, do any sitters give you feedback, or it's kind of because you're catching the essence of the person through the drawing, not
Yes.
only the visual representation? And
Right.
do they understand that, or do you have that discussion before, or they know who you are and they kind of go with it?
Well, usually they go with it. I mean, usually they're always engaged with me. And usually, sometimes they will say something, but I suppose the best thing that they say is, you've drawn the way that I felt while I was sitting there. And that to me is really the essence of it.
Yeah.
Drawing how they were feeling. It's not just about the looks, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's what helped create the life in the work, basically.
And when you were a tutor, because I've spoken to some people who were tutored by you, and they were just saying, they mainly just said, "Oh, Harold was a fantastic tutor." They never really, you know, because I did drawing, and I remember the tutor going through all of these sort of hard moments of teaching me how to look, like working with my left hand, drawing blind. You know, it was a constant sort of education in how to draw. And obviously you were teaching at St. Martin's, where it's more fashion based, but did you have that sort of little journey of experience? Like, what would be a few experiences that you would give in a sort of as a tutor, like day one, what would happen. Like even changing pencils, I remember the tutor saying, no, you need to change your pencil. Like your pencil was either too sharp or you were working incorrectly with it, or try with a fatter pencil. All of these sort of experiences, finding your right equipment was quite important.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, there are certain, I suppose, aspects of the process of drawing, which, you know, for instance, like one thing, your materials and the way you sit or stand, or and the materials you work with, because some things may work in your favor, and some things you might be fighting against it because it's not doing what you want. Well, it could be that you're just not, you haven't got the right equipment, or, you know, so there's certain sort of technical things you can give to students, which is really just sort of practical. But when I was teaching, I too also did a lot of those exercises, which is really just to loosen people up, you know, and to draw really with, but in the way they want to draw. It's not necessarily, and so with all the different experiences, they will find their way that suits them. And when I think it's important as a tutor that you're able to understand and have the insight to see what is their individual way of working, and to draw that out. I mean, I think it's quite important that a teacher doesn't impress their own style or their own methods onto students who have their own creativity, you know, but you can help them sort of find it, you know, that's for sure.
And so we'll move on, because these were sort of when I was doing a bit of homework on portraits, and I saw these two pieces that you did, and these were ex-students of yours, Richard Nicol and Richard Malone.
Yes.
And I just I think Richard Nicol, because I worked with Richard Nicol when I was lecturing, and I think he fits a bit of your criteria of this sort of thin, gangly. He was quite smallish in frame. But I looked at these. It was funny because the bigger one on the page here, I felt really captures Richard, who he is. And
Yes.
then the other one sort of captures the other side of who Richard was in his sort of other work. They have two different looks. And if people go on the National Portrait, you'll see these two different outcomes. One is sort of the sort of visual side of him. And then the other one has a bit more of it reminds me of Cool Fashion. And that, like a sort of Fred Perry look or something, that sort of look of that moment.
Oh, right.
That's how I felt when I was looking at them two. And then the Richard Malone one is what I would call a sort of classic great drawing. And I don't know how did were you commissioned for these, or
I know
purchased them?
I do very few commissions, very few. No, they're just people I knew, and I asked them to sit. And Richard Nicol, the one on the left, the big drawing, the biggest one on the screen, that's the last one I did of him. And when I did it, he said his comment was, "That's the best one you've done of me." And the other little one on the bottom, that was probably the very first one I ever did of him. And so there's probably 16 years apart in that those two drawings.
Wow. I think you can really, it's fun. I didn't know the time frame between the two, but I could see the sort of the development in the change and the sort of really getting.
Yeah, it's probably it would be yeah, it would probably be about 16 years apart. and the one with the red shirt on the, I'm pretty sure that's one of the very first ones I did of him. And the last one, which is the double figures, that is definitely the very last one I did of him, just a few months before he died.
Yeah, I guess it, because the color and that sort of the head tilting, it really, because I had friends who knew Richard really well, and he kept it quite private about his illness, and it just really captures the whole. It's like a whole lifetime of a person in the drawing, and I think that's what drawing can capture beyond photography, is your response to him, his feelings. And I don't know, when I saw this, it's kind of an emotional piece. That's
Yes.
what I felt. Did you feel that doing this? Did this feel like you knew what was going to happen, and this was like the final, the grand finale?
No, not at all. No, I expected to do many more of him. But he did sit for me over a period of about 20 years or something like that. not every, not just every now and again, But he liked coming to sit because he felt he could, it was somewhere he could just be calm.
So when you drew this piece, did you draw the two figures within one moment, like one day, one sitting, or?
Oh, yes, it's all one sitting.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was all quite quick.
All one sitting.
Also, I noticed the use of coloured paper. When did that decision come about?
Do you mean the one of Richard Malone?
Just in general, like your use of coloured paper as a medium.
Yeah, I don't use a lot of coloured paper, or very subtly coloured, but the one of Richard Malone, which is on a yellow ochre colour paper, I chose it because of the colour, but also because the quality of the paper. But the yellow ochre is something that I've used ever since I was a schoolboy, and I particularly like that colour. And when I was quite young, I had a teacher who I used to work with. She was a teacher who taught me the basics of oil painting and how to prepare your canvas and all that sort of thing, mixing colors and just using, pretty much using primary colors, but mixing your own colors. But anyway, but yellow ochre was the base color that I used to prime the canvas with. And I still like to work on that color today. It's one of my, I just have a feeling for it, I don't use it a lot. In fact, that particular paper is now, they don't make it anymore. So I have to find another one.
And have you thought of staining paper, or does it lose its sort of texture quality?
No, not a great deal. I mean, the quality of the paper is the most important to me. But I don't particularly like bright white paper. But I don't like to do too many sort of effects, if you mean, on a paper. I find it, if things become a bit of a, I don't know, just a bit of a, not a fad, but just a
gimmick,
a crutch or a gimmick.
Yeah.
I find that disturbing. I just like something to be as it is and in a natural way. I suppose it's like my walls in the house,
Yeah.
But then I do my thing on top of it. But it's really the quality of the paper, which is really important. I mean, I pore over paper, hundreds of papers before I choose one. it's the most important part of the whole thing. I mean, is the quality of the paper or the canvas. When I started to use more canvas, I like it to be very similar to the quality of the paper. And you can find canvas that has that texture. So it's but usually the color that I put on is usually to do with creating the work, you know.
Yeah. And I was just thinking of like painting on walls, like Stanley Spencer or someone like that.
Oh yeah.
It would be interesting. Have you ever drawn on walls?
Well, I have done a few drawings. I've done a few little drawings on the walls in my studio, but not really very much intentionally. It's just something like if you were on the phone and you drew something on the wall.
Yeah.
Like a doodle. But I've done very big drawings or paintings, you know, which I've done working on an easel. But I don't really like to work completely flat on the wall. That's why I like an easel, because I like the easel to be slightly at an angle.
I was just wondering, it would be fascinating to see some of these, because I remember as a kid drawing on lining paper because it was cheap.
Oh yeah.
And I just wonder if it had that sort of off-white color and if it had the right texture. So if you were to draw on a wall, I wonder if lining paper would be, or if they were able to move the walls.
Yeah.
We'd have two requests: a texture of paper and the wall can move at the angle of canvas.
I did draw. I just remembered I did do a drawing on a wall in a gallery. In the gallery, I showed at a few years ago, and they asked me to draw on the wall in the window for the exhibition. And after the exhibition, they painted over it for the next exhibition. But that was quite a challenge because I only had about, I think about 50 centimeters or 70 centimeters space to actually stand in, because the window was quite close to the wall. And my model had to lie on the floor and I worked on a stepladder. But we still got it done, you know.
I saw photographs, and I wonder if that experience, because obviously you're now not got the distance from the sitter, you're on top of the sitter.
Yeah.
You're kind of working in this space. And I was just trying to think of a photographer who used to shoot in very small spaces, not Paolo Reversi, but there's a photographer who, it might have been, not Maplethorpe, but there was a photographer and he'd always shoot in these really narrow voids.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it would be quite an interesting experience for you to draw in narrow spaces. So it's like an immersive experience of drawing.
Yeah.
Because I think from a drawing perspective is challenging the experience of drawing.
Yes.
That's quite that could be quite interesting, that people could, I'm thinking from a gallery experience, if we walked through this sort of tunnel of your experience of drawing within that short space, because the drawing must have changed and the shape, because when you're drawing so close, you're looking and drawing down, and the perspective and the proportions will all be quite either elongated or twisted. Yes. Or like drawing on a ceiling for Michelangelo.
Yes.
You went through that similar journey.
Yes.
How do you think that could add to your practice? I don't know. I was just thinking there of this.
Well, usually I know exactly what you mean, and I think it can be quite fortuitous in that you develop something that you would not have done otherwise. So it can be quite creative. But usually I do it when I'm faced with certain circumstances which you have to do that. There's no other option. So it makes you think on the spot, and you might have to make a lot of inventions, you're forced to create something that in a situation you're not normally working in, which can have a creative effect. But I don't usually go out of my way to do that. I mean, in that case with the drawing in the studio and the gallery wall, I was sort of forced to do it. But it also meant I was drawing in public because the public were walking by, but which I've also done in a couple of instances, but I wouldn't want to repeat it. But it's the same with, when the lockdown was on, I couldn't have people coming to the studio. So I used Zoom. And as I said before, I don't like to work with photographs. So working from a screen, the model sitting in their own house or whatever, and I can see them on my screen, it forced me to work in a way that I haven't worked before, but it did have extraordinary results. And I started to realize that there was something in it, and it made me work in a different way altogether that I was normally working. So that was I felt quite energized and inspired by that,
Yeah, because that's how I find that with people that do drawings, there is a moment of challenge, and then they go, I'll bring that into what I do.
Yeah.
And with Zoom, what did it do? Like, because obviously you're looking at a 3D image, but on a 2D screen.
Yeah.
Like what happened? Like, what was the moment? Like, what was this little aha moment?
Well, it made me realize that, on a screen, you can't, they're not in the room with you. So although, the clarity is quite clear, but it isn't really clear. Some things are in a shadow, or where you could see something extremely clearly before, it's not so clear. So it made me realize that I had to draw. One of my stipulations about how I work is I draw what I see. So I drew what I saw, which was sort of a blur. And so to work that way, it made me work with a brush much more. So I was drawing with a brush, basically.
Right. So we might see some larger, and have you experimented more with bigger brushes? Because obviously the pencil gives you a very fragile line, and I guess the pastel has the same sort of outcomes, but a bit chunkier than a pencil.
Yeah.
So the brush experiences, are you using a dry brush or?
They are wet, but they're not saturated. They're just wet, but I can work with them without dripping. I'm not a big fan of drips.
Yeah.
I find drips
Another gimmick.
a bit of a gimmick, yeah. But I mean, some people who do drips, maybe they do it very well, but I just find for myself, I think it is a bit of a gimmick,
Yeah.
for myself, as it were.
Yeah, it is a hard one, because I think everyone goes for a little drip period and then they get rid of it quite quickly. It comes and then vanishes. And
yeah, well, I mean, I do work on another paper I use is called Pergamenita, and it's a sort of vellum-like paper. So when I use the paint, I always mix my paint with a thinner, so it looks almost like watercolor.
yeah.
But it's inclined to run down this paper. It doesn't get absorbed by the paper. It just sits on the top. So a lot of those, you do get a drip now and again. and that's all right, you know.
Yeah. It's not deliberately done to mask over other
No,
things.
no, it's not deliberate. That's the point.
Yeah.
Just happened by chance.
And moving on from the sitter, which has been quite an interesting area, is the flowers. You know, we're thinking of the Van Goghs, and we're thinking about all the sort of, even Charles René Mackintosh, William Morris, people who studied flowers and looked at flowers. And I found, like, is the flower, because, you know, you've got David Hockney drawing a dog, or like, what attracted you to the flower? Beauty, or
Well, it's nature, really. And I do love flowers just in my house. You know, I just like them on the table and whatever, in the garden. And but very early on in my life, I discovered, I mean, I had naturally wanted to draw flowers, probably because I admired them. They, you know, they're so beautiful. But I find drawing nature, flowers, plants, flowers particularly, because I use them quite a lot. If I'm not working with a model, a sitter, then I usually go and buy flowers or have them from the garden or whatever, because I find them the most challenging. And I think they are just, in a sense, like a human. They can be very bold or quite delicate. And in just one flower, you can have all those, you know, you can have all the different strengths, if you like, in one flower. So it makes you think about it. You know, when you're working, you have to be able to portray it just like you're portraying a person. You know, its qualities and its characteristics. And that is extremely hard to do. I find them probably more difficult to do than working with a person, because they are so, they're a living thing, you know, they're not just an object. So to give them, you know, to have them keep their life, if you see what I mean. It's a real challenge. And I think drawing flowers for me is a bit like, it keeps me on my toes, because it's such a challenging thing to do.
And also, I guess, moving on, like, because I see sort of a flower listening to you as this sort of, it's very humanistic. It starts as a seed and it grows, and then it slowly begins to, like, blossoms and then will fade away. So
Yeah,
it is quite like the life cycle speeded up. And I think
yes,
and flowers are super challenging to make them not seem too decorative. That I think that was the hard part of a flower doesn't become a floral drawing, where it becomes decorative. And I think that's where it keeps you on your toes, where you don't want it to be decoration.
No.
And I think that's I'm trying to kind of guess from me drawing flowers, and, you know, my mum might say, "Oh, draw me some flowers," and I'm like, no, because I know I don't want them to be decoration.
Right. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with, I don't think there's anything wrong with decoration. For instance, like embroidery, flower embroideries can be absolutely exquisite, you know. But I think it's the intention. What do you want from it? You know, what do you want from this flower? I remember once telling some students, if you want to draw flowers, you have to engage with it in a way that you can feel what it's like to be that flower. So if you're drawing a poppy, for instance, you're not going to feel like you're a rose or a lily. And I think at first they didn't quite grasp it. I think they just thought I was quite weird. But I do believe that still, you know, you have to actually feel what it's like to be that flower. You know, you have to be able to so you can interpret it, you understand them. That's not drawing in a decorative way. Drawing in a decorative way is to make a pretty object, a pretty drawing, but that is a completely different motivation. Nothing wrong with it, but it's not drawing the way I draw, really.
Yeah. Animals. Have you drawn animals or?
Yes, I have. I've drawn cats, and I had, I drew my own cats, and I've drawn dogs and horses. Horses are also extremely difficult. I think everything is difficult, really, because I have such high demands on myself, I mean, you can make a drawing without much effort, and it can be okay, but if you're not happy, it probably means that you really weren't concentrating, or you weren't really inspired, or but for me, it's usually you weren't concentrating. That's one of the main requirements that you need to be able to have a successful piece of work. You can't sort of draw and then be thinking of what you're going to do at lunchtime or something like that. That's totally not acceptable.
And your environment, do you have music or anything on in the environment, like distracting you, or what's the environment to keep that concentration?
Yeah, I always draw with music, but sometimes the music stops because it's run out, and if I'm in the middle of work, I don't always jump to replay it or something. But I also do it because for the model. So if I have a sitter, I think it's quite important to keep them also engaged, and I find it helps with the concentration. And I like to choose the music appropriately. So depending on the sitter or the mood of the day, or just something to sort of get us started.
Good.
And then it's sort of there, but it's not taking my attention. It's just sort of around me, But I can't draw with the radio on, for instance, with people talking, and that I can't bear. I don't like it at all.
Yeah, I guess it feels like someone's chatting to you, or because you kind of want it there as something, but not. I think it is the concentration. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to reimagine for myself, because when we did life drawing, I'm just going to go into this sort of this image, which I think we'll kind of we'll remember it. So because I just want to stop sharing so we can see each other. But this image, if you can kind of remember it in your mind.
Yeah.
But because I guess that image, we've been talking about fashion, art, and illustration, and being the artist. Like what? Because I know you went into fashion and kind of moved out of it, and then worked as a tutor, and then having the ability to teach and draw. Like it funded, and it meant you didn't have to worry about the corporate life of other garbage. You can kind of teach and draw, and I remember the reason why I started teaching was because I wanted the facilities.
You wanted the
facilities, like the printmaking studios,
I see.
And I think that was my attraction to become a teacher. What was the moment when teaching was enough, or you knew the journey of teaching, or you just retired, or enough was enough?
Well, I think it wasn't that I'd had enough. It was just that I was very tired. It's an extremely tiring job. And, I was well past my retirement age, but I felt I never set out to be a teacher. That was the thing. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I never ever had any desire to be a teacher. But one of my teachers that I had myself, it was her who asked me to do some teaching. And she had to convince me that I would be all right, because I thought, well, she is the perfect teacher, and I'm nothing like her. But she was convinced, and she more or less persuaded me to do it, or that was being polite. She more or less told me to do it, you know. So I sort of took her word for it because I admired her so much. But when I did go and do some teaching, I found that I really enjoyed it. It was rather a great experience. And to work with students, I think, is such a privilege, you know, when they're really committed and they're so passionate. And because it is a lot of hard work, you know, it isn't just something you're doing for fun. I mean, obviously it's fun too because you love it, but I mean, it's really hard work. You know, it's not a superficial thing, you know.
And because I know CSMs, like, you know, I know other, I want to call them fashion illustrators, but they're kind of fashion artists, I guess, that are teaching at St. Martin's and they're still running like at the Royal College, there's a drawing area.
Right.
And I know we're seeing a big sort of dropout to drawing within fashion. Like, do you think, because you taught at in a fashion department, but it was about fashion, not about drawing, but do you think drawing played a big role to the fashion designers?
Well, I thought it was essential, basically. Not so you could become a fashion illustrator, but just to be able to get your ideas out of your head and to illustrate, you know, I suppose illustrate or to show them what you're thinking, not to other people, but to yourself. You know, I used to think that it takes 100 ideas, like 100 drawings, to get one good one. If you're designing, you know, they don't just all fall out all at once. I mean, but drawing was a way that you could express what you were trying to do. And drawing is an immediate, you know, you can see something immediately. You don't have to actually spend the whole day trying to make it. You can draw it first and then make it. And then if you're a student and you want to show your portfolio of, you know, for the potential to get work, it's usually done with a lot of drawings, you know, as well as things you've made. But I think the drawing was a way to begin with, as a way that people could express their ideas, communication, really.
And when you saw the drawings of the designs, so when you saw the Gallianos or Christopher Kane drawings, did you look at their drawings and see the potential that it could bring to their fashion design? Because there's obviously some people who don't like Paul Smith or who are more designed by style, where Galliano, Karl Lagerfeld, they had a real understanding of drawing, which fed through to their actual practice of design. It went hand in hand. Did you see that in their drawing, that the capabilities that could be brought into the fashion, or was there great drawers and they just couldn't, their fashion was not going to happen?
No, you could usually see it in the drawing. It's definitely, you can see it. But that's a skill, that's a sort of a skill also of the tutor. You have to be able to see it yourself, you know. But I mean, John Galliano, for instance, he could really draw, you know, he was a very good student, and he was one of my very first students. And you could see straight away that he had talent, you know. There was no question. It was just right there. And I mean, I never knew Karl Lagerfeld, but I do know that he did love drawing. He did draw a lot of drawing himself. But I think it's quite important to. I mean, some people don't really do too much drawing. They don't do drawing that, you know, they want to make beautiful illustrations. They're just drawing to communicate their ideas. It's two different camps, if you like. One is really a means of communication, whether it's to other people or just for yourself. They're like, you know, little notes to get the ideas out, because obviously your brain is hopefully full of ideas, and you know, if you can see it visually, it spurs you on, you know. Then you think, oh no, it's not there, that needs to change this, or put that on it, or add it, or take it away. But to draw something as a means of, as an illustration, it usually means that you want to, for instance, fashion illustration is a way of selling something. So you're selling an idea, and often if you're an illustrator, you're selling somebody else's idea, not your own. So, you know, if for instance, if you're illustrating a designer's collection, you never designed it, but you would be illustrating it. You want to be able to do it in a way that's going to sell it, you know, like it's a way of advertising, I suppose, as well as communication. But it's really to be able to, you know, to put it over in that way. It's a form of, I guess, promotion.
What because we have a sort of collective of people who, and we were trying to work out the roles of people, and we saw that fashion illustrators or artists, because they're kind of stuck in flux at the moment, is giving a second life to fashion. So you have a fashion collection. So you might have a fashion illustrator who helped the designer convey their concept, then makes the garments. And then if a show like McQueen happens, or Galliano from Margiela or someone like that, and then the illustrator is almost a new documentary form for capturing the essence of fashion. And this is something that I feel is an area that's at a sort of a moment that's kind of coming through. And I think there's been a big growth in it and a big understanding for it, and maybe a reappreciation for it. And I feel that, you know, someone like you, if I was Galliano or Dries Van Noten or Raf Simons, to recapture a show by an artist is some, rather than just a photographer for editorial purposes. I think it's another area that, for me, I'm grappling with at the moment, because there's great people who are great at drawing, who we love fashion in some strange way, and we find it's sucking us in to want to draw it.
Right.
And we you know, someone had said we're giving a second life to fashion, and I thought that was quite a nice.
With drawing, you mean?
Through drawing, like a document, like Richard Haynes, who's a documentary sort of capturing the collections, like David Downton did or does. And I feel there's a real area there for artists or people that draw to capture these shows. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on people. Like, if I asked you, if I was Prada, and I said, I really want you to capture our show, how would you feel about that? Or would you say, don't do that anymore, I'm done?
Well, to be quite honest, I've never really done it. I mean, when I was a student, I did a little bit in London when I was a student for a newspaper. But then when I went to New York, I lived in New York for a couple of years, and I studied in New York when I was there. And afterwards, when I graduated, I was working in New York, but nobody liked my figure drawings. And then one day, one of the art agencies or whatever, they said, these are not fashion drawings, they're life drawings. And I said, well, that's what I like to do. That's what I'm doing, you know. And they said, well, they're life drawings, they're not fashion drawings. Well, that freed me up completely. I just knew that I didn't want to do, I was doing it purely for myself. I didn't particularly want to do it for fashion. I mean, I did have a couple of instances where I did do a couple, I think it was like one or two, and they chopped off the heads and put somebody else's heads on it and all sorts of things like that. But then someone told me directly, these aren't fashion, these are life drawings. But that's what I do. I always draw from life. And since then, I've only done a couple of commissions, and one of them was by John Galliano. But I already liked to draw his clothes. And when he first started to show his collections, I used to ask if I could borrow some of the clothes to put on my models. And I just did it for myself. I didn't do it for him. But he obviously knew my drawings. And once or twice he asked me if I would do some work for him. And it worked purely because he just said, I would like a drawing, but he never gave me any direction. He just said, I want one of your drawings. But if someone says, can you draw this garment, but you've got to show all the buttons and you've got to show all that sort of thing, forget it. You know, I'm not the man you want.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I feel this within our sort of community is they're kind of like yourself, want to draw for the passion of drawing, but don't want to be directed because it kills the spirit of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I feel that it has to be almost an agreement of, here's the garment, you style it, draw it, and do as you wish. And I think I feel that there's a real place for that, because someone like yourself documenting fashion in this way is going to be missed. I think it will be a sad situation.
There, in the past, for instance, when illustration was much more widely used, for instance, in New York, when I was a student there in the 70s, for instance, the New York Times was full of drawings every single day, every day, you know. Well, I don't know if I don't think it's like that now. And, you know, there are all the great illustrators, you know, Perlman, Antonio, Kenneth Paul Block. You know, you'd see their work every day. Stippelman, Paul. And some of those teachers used to teach at Parsons, where I was a student. But, you know, they were people who were really drawing what they loved. You know, they're specialists. That's what they do. You know, they are absolutely drawing fashion, you know, but they're just, you know, like everything else in the world, there are people who are just at the top of their game. And there are a lot of people who maybe don't have that kind of standing, but, you know, still do lovely drawings. But I think you have to be totally committed. And I do believe that some of the, you know, some fashion illustrators, they're absolutely, you know, they produce such beautiful work. Even if you sort of think that they're only an illustration, they're not like they're not art, they're an illustration. But I suppose there is an art to illustration, you know, just like if you for instance, like a political cartoonist, you know, some of those drawers are just exceptional. You know, they're beautiful drawings, but, you know, they specialize in that medium, you know.
Because one of the things I'd love to try out is to get all the political illustrators to draw fashion collections like Searle, Scarf, and see what happens, because they kind of draw and then they add in their imagination, and they're becoming a sort of a lost. I had David Hughes, who was an amazing sort of political illustrator, and they're kind of illustrator artists, almost crazy people as well. So because they have all of these sort of skills, and it's a lost art, but I think it could be brought. It's something that I'm desperate to see come into, and even life drawing, because life drawing's growing at the moment, and we're seeing big groups of people doing fashion life drawing.
Yeah,
and it's growing fast and heavy, and there's a desire for it. And I feel even someone like you, who could document and capture moments with your eye and ability, is something that, for me, I would love to see. And you saying this John Galliano drawing, but that was, you know, that's how long ago was he commissioning that? Was that while he was at
well, I think I first did a commission for him probably in the 90s sometime. But I was drawing his things after he graduated in the sort of late 80s. And then a bit later on, when he was working at Dior, I did a whole lot of work there, just for for a project when he was launching a perfume. I think that's when I did some for him. But you know, when you mention like people like Gerald Scarf, you know, when you see a Gerald Scarf drawing, you know exactly what it is. You know it's a Gerald Scarf drawing, and it has a message, a political message, which is a truth. And it's about truth in the drawing. It's probably exaggerating the truth, if you see what I mean. It's like a caricature, but it's based on truth. And that for me is really important in a drawing, because it's not just made up. It's not just there for the effect, like a drip, you know, it's purposefully done and communicated in such a way, but they do it in their own way. So I imagine if he was drawing something about something in fashion, it would have a kind of a political connotation, perhaps, you know, and you would be able to see it was a Gerald Scarf drawing. But I think, you know, his work lends itself entirely, pretty much to having a truth in the work, you know, and it communicates a message without words.
Yeah.
And that's the really strength of political cartoons.
Yeah.
You don't need the words, it's the image that does it all.
Yeah. So because I'm mindful of time and we could talk forever, but I guess anything that you're doing at the moment that's been quite challenging to you? Are you doing anything that's quite challenging? Or because I know Rupert mentioned that you've got some commissions on. Is there anything at the moment that you, like I'm saying, a wall painting or something that you're doing that you feel that's challenging you?
Well, it's always challenging. I try not to get into a comfortable, you know, like a comfy position where you just do it without much, I suppose, what's the word, commitment, and to be challenged, you know, to really make you concentrate. So I'm doing that with myself, and I think it's a sort of natural. You get to a point where you just feel, I need some new energy of something, So usually also my materials can do that. You know, I can change the paper I work on or have somebody new to sit for me or
What
things
about
like that.
what about landscapes? Before we disappear, what about going out out into the big wide world and drawing landscapes, doing a David Hockney?
Well, usually when I travel, when I go to Australia, when I visit Australia or France, I do landscape work when I go there, and but how I approach it is I don't usually draw huge expanses. I usually work on details within the landscape rather than a whole valley or something like that. You know.
Is that because you quite like to work quite fast, or like how long do you give yourself for a drawing? What's the longest drawing you've done?
Well, some drawings, some of the very large drawings, which I've done in the past when I did a whole series of very big pieces, can take. I mean, they become paintings really, but I mean, I always think that I'm drawing with a brush. You know, they are still, because I'm still making marks, so I still refer to them as drawings. But some of the really long ones can take a couple of years over a long period of time. And some of them I work on several, you know, maybe I worked on several at the same time. So I'd be working on one, and then the next day I'd work on a different one. And then next week I would go back to the first one and start working on that. But I'm not changing things, I'm just adding to it, you know.
And before I let you go and have dinner or whatever, I know you're in North London based, aren't you?
Yes.
I'm North London. I'm not, and I'm an Arsenal fan. So hopefully one day I'll come and knock on your door and have a cup of tea before 11, which would be great. I'll have to book it in with Rupert.
Oh, well, I don't have guests before 11 either. It's my time for myself.
Well, after 11, I'll bring you a croissant.
Not to be inhospitable.
but thanks for your time, and you know it's been a pleasure to speak to you, Howard.
Oh, well, I'm pleased. Thank you very much for asking me.
I've been slowly getting Rupert onto my team to allow me to speak to you. So thanks to Rupert and our persistence to get you, and it's been brilliant to hear your feedback and your words. So hopefully good luck with the new work, and I know you've got some commissions. So thank you and have a great day, and what a pleasure. Cheers, Howard. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.